to this live stream for Underpin Consultants. My name is Lewis. I'm a change and growth consultant for Underpin Consultants. And what we do is we help businesses, organizations, and charities plot better paths to success, whatever that success might be. And one of the things I wanted to do today is talk about how businesses are all very different, and they all have different reasons and roles and perceptions and challenges that they face throughout their history, whether that history be 100 years or 10 months or 10 years. But I wanted to focus specifically on an organization that is from the city where I was born and bred, and a organization that's very prominent and has a lot of information behind it, and people have a lot of thoughts on it because it is Manchester United Football Club. And what I've seen and been looking at over the last 12 months is how they've been dealing with this transition of new effective ownership. And what's really interesting there is ownership is quite different depending on how you look at it. The owners of the company remain the Glazer family, who are controversial within both football and Manchester United specifically, but also the actual running of the club day to day is now been done by Sir Jim Radcliffe, who does not own a majority shareholding within the company, but is effectively running it as if he is. It's quite interesting to see how they've approached certain things, because obviously Jim Radcliffe runs Ineos, they're a chemicals company, but they're also very focused on cycling over the last 20 years. Things like Marginal Gains is something that they really put on. Dave Brailsford, they've been incredibly successful in that arena. But at the moment, Ineos as a whole, British Cycling, and now Manchester United are all going through what people would describe as challenges. So what I wanted to do today as a change and growth consultant, someone who focuses on business, is looking at what we can learn from Manchester United in regards to what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, what the perception of that is, and how such a public company which has such a strong connection to so many people and everybody has an opinion on it, how you navigate having stakeholders, which the fans and the wider community is, in something that also has to be a business, but is also an entertainment, and various other things like that. So that's what we're going to have a look at today. So bear with me a second. We're going to run back. So there are some financial facts here that we need to kind of have a look at. And what I want to do is bring up where United are now from a financial point of view. United have lost over £300 million in the last year. Their revenues are down 12%. They've dropped from 225 million to 198. Broadcast revenue has collapsed by 42%, and that's because they're not in the Champions League. That's something that an organization doesn't really have to worry about, is that the majority of your work and information comes from the success of very few people within the company. And so you can see there that there is a lot of issues that are long term, and when we talk about marginal losses, repeatedly not hitting targets, which United aren't doing at the moment on the field, is leading to them not hitting targets off the field. And what we want to see in a business is growth and strong positivity. And where we're looking at from a positivity point of view, it's pretty dire. From an entirely business point of view, this is pretty dire. So when we talk about the things that United are doing, and specifically Sir Jim Radcliffe is spearheading at the moment, it's completely understandable and completely acceptable from a business point of view that they're having to make some of the decisions they're having to make. My concern as a business consultant is there has been such a long history of mismanagement, a long history of a lack of long-term planning. And for several years, they didn't have a sporting director. When they got a sporting director with Dan Ashworth back in July, they initially were told to pay 10 million from Newcastle, ended up being around 2.5 million. Within 4 months, he was gone. If you look specifically at what happened over the summer, you can see there's a lack of long-term planning, because Erik ten Hag, who was the manager and effectively leading a large department, probably the most important department at Manchester United if you think about it like a business, which is the on-field performance, they backed him in the summer. There was a lot of toing and froing of whether they should keep him or not. Some of that was done in public domain. Then a couple of months later, they sacked him. That sacking cost £14.5 million. They sacked all his backroom staff, and and I believe because some of the issues with who the next person should be, Dan Ashworth was also removed as well. And if you look from since 2013, that one position, that one area has taken up £70 million of money that has been paid out to people to not work at Manchester United anymore. And you can see there, 5 million for David Moyes, 8.4 million for Louis van Gaal, nearly 20 million for Jose Mourinho, and 24 million for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Ralf Rangnick. And what this does is twofold. It makes it feel like there is a issue with leadership and management of knowing what they want and where they're going. But the problem is Jim Ratcliffe could have come in as a new business owner and said that we're going to have a long-term plan now, we're going to do this, we're going to make sure that we've got all of the things in place. We're going to hire someone like Dan Ashworth, we're going to hire someone like Omar Barada, and we're going to put something in and we're going to do something right. And what that does is that instills confidence and instills positivity. And as a leader, you have to do those things as well as the tough decisions. And so when you immediately then make a decision like keeping Ten Hag and then sacking him a couple of months later, spending £14.5 million on sacking that person, getting another £10 million to get the next person in, and we'll go to some of the issues with that in a moment, you end up with a situation where people think you are the same as it always was before. And one of the things that Ineos and Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Dave Brailsford and other people within the previous organisations that they have run have been noted for is marginal gains, focusing on leadership, focusing on quality. And what they're doing is they're not creating a situation where people can feel confident in the decisions that they're making. So let's have a look at what we can glean from Manchester United and go into a little bit of the examples and the business applications. So the first one is you can run a business like a business, but not too much like a business. Balancing financial responsibility with stakeholder expectations is crucial. Manchester United are currently attempting to cut costs through redundancies and price hikes, but these actions are alienating fans and damaging brand loyalty. This is a hyper issue for Manchester United because they are effectively a community asset and stakeholder led by the fans. And if the fans get annoyed and upset, then revenues go down and it can become a vicious cycle. This can be something that's real positive to tackle in any business, but it is highlighted here of how difficult it is for Manchester United at the moment to solve these problems, losing 300 million, revenues down, broadcast revenue, whilst at the same time being a club that is beloved by millions and millions of people who all have, much like I'm doing right now, opinions on how the club should be run. Companies only focus on the bottom line at the expense of the customers, and employee satisfaction risk long-term damage to their reputations and revenue streams. And I think what's interesting at the moment, and I'm not confident in that this is being done at the moment, is there doesn't appear to be or feel like there is a coherent joined-up strategy between making redundancies and communicating things effectively. And there isn't a spokesperson at the moment for Manchester United who is giving all of this information out. A lot of it is being requested for comment. So Jim Ratcliffe doesn't seem to be the kind of person who wants to be talking all the time about this. But you need a curator. You need a caretaker. You need someone to walk people through the building that you're trying to renovate and say, yes, it looks terrible now, but this is why we're doing it. This is the positive outcomes that will come for it. And look at some of the plans we've put in place already to make sure that we're delivering on this. And I don't think they are effectively communicating this at the moment. And it's got to the point where it's become crisis management as opposed to change management. And that's something that's really important, is that if you don't look at the issues and try and work with people to solve them, they eventually become crises. And then you need a completely different type of communication and from a leadership point of view to kind of put out the fires. A really interesting point for Manchester United as well is a lot of people have been turning around and saying, well, you know, Bruno Fernandes is on £20.8 million and you're cutting staff. United want to cut another 250 staff. Why are they doing that? Why don't they just get rid of Bruno Fernandes, for example? Well, the answer is you can't just get rid of Bruno Fernandes. Unlike all of the people that who are on standard UK employment contracts in the UK, footballers are on very strange, very unusual contracts where they get paid for 5 years and they are registered by a club and they earn extraordinary amounts of money, and that's because the market has been set. And so the issue that United have, and all football clubs have, and a lot of businesses is, when it comes to cutting the fat, when it comes to making big change, you are a lot of times hamstrung by what you're actually able to do. An example of this would be if you're on a 10-year lease, that Bruno Fernandes is effectively a 5-year lease on a building or some big piece of equipment that's going to come in. And once you've got that and you're locked into this legally, there's nothing you can do to get out of it. So when it comes to solving your problems, and what's interesting is, if not to get political, but if you look at what Rachel Reeves and Labour did before the election, they turned around and ruled out a bunch of tax rises, which is fine. And I'm not talking about the political nature of that, but what I'm saying is if you do that, you are removing options for what you're trying to do. So, you can't raise national insurance. You can't sell Bruno Fernandes for multiple reasons. One reason is you can't just get rid of his contract. Two, if you try to sell him, that reduces the quality of the team. And all of these things are really interesting to think about when it comes to general business. And although, as much as we would like to be spending £300,000 a week on a goal scorer for our business, once we have him and once we locked him in, we need to understand that that's fixed. It's a fixed cost now, and we can only look around the company to find other losses, other changes to reduce the losses that we're creating. Third one is non-compliant HR procedures can be costly. Again, another completely insane thing about football is that you can have managers on similar 4-year contracts. They get sacked and they are paid for the rest of their contract because that's what the way the contracts work. Employees don't work like that. But HR mismanagement is also turning around to someone in the summer and saying you're doing a great job, and then 3 months later getting rid of them at the cost of nearly £15 million. We need to ensure that when we hire people, that we're hiring them for the right reasons and that we understand the costs of hiring them. So, for example, someone is on £60,000 a year. Actually, on top of that, you've got your national insurance, you've got your pension, you've got costs for building, you've got all of that other stuff. So before hiring someone, are we including all of the issues that we need to do? And when it comes to managing the expectations, making sure that we're open and honest with people and we understand the definitions of getting it wrong. And so the issue, I think, here at Manchester United during the time of kind of the end of Terry Hag is everybody knew what was going on. There's lots of gossip and innuendo and understanding that this was, they'd looked for other people and they hadn't got him. That's reducing confidence, not just confidence for Erik ten Hag, the person, the human, but also the management position and also the people's faith in the management position and people's faith in leadership for putting the manager in that position. And so that's a really important point. But also, it just reduces confidence of other people within the business. So players are brought in by one particular manager to do a particular job, and then you move on to a different manager who wants that player to do a different job, and all of a sudden they're out of the door. And now you have people in the wrong holes doing the wrong things, and looking at, you've now got players playing in the wrong position. If you're a business and you've got a manager, and you are, that manager is a particular kind of manager, they're very forward and they're very progressive, and they let people work from home and they do all of this kind of stuff. That's similar to the way that Eric Ten Hag plays. If that manager leaves and you bring in another manager, someone who plays in a completely different way, someone who manages in a completely different way, you've got a bunch of people there who might not be able to do the job that your new manager wants to do. And if you're not thinking about that, if you're not understanding that a team is a team, and bringing in a manager is not just about of an organization, a director of an organization is not just about, oh, well, they'll figure it out. It's about providing them with the support that they need to do the job that you've asked them to do. And when we get onto our golden issue at Manchester United, in my opinion, you will see that if you remove one kind of manager and install a completely different kind of manager with no support, with no positivity, you are setting them up for failure. You're not setting them up for success. So revenue means nothing without cost control. That's an interesting one. So Manchester United is incredibly profitable from a revenue point of view, but you're still operating at a loss if your expenses aren't managed properly. Despite massive revenues, United's operating profit plummeted by 88.7%. Revenue is not profit. And what's really interesting is when you look at financial tables of football clubs, they talk about revenue. And the reason for that is the next point. Some industries run at a loss. Every football team in the world, unless they have an incredibly serious benefactor, run at a loss. They lose money every season. And that's from, if you make a profit, it's a small profit. And 3.1 million revenue off, the amount of revenue that United are pushing is very, very small. And it's so dependent on the success of such a small team of people. If you look at the thousand people who work within Manchester United, the success of Manchester United is effectively down to less than 30 people. And most of those are players with a very, very specific niche job, which is either put the ball in the net or stop the ball from going in the net or pass it to the person who puts it in the net. And so when you have that amount of reliance upon such a small team, you need to keep control of revenue. And what's happening at the moment with Manchester United is they are having to cost cut to such a degree with such limited ability to pull the levers of business. And I'd love to do potentially another one on the way that Barcelona have dealt with this in terms of selling future rights for 25 years. It's not sustainable. Debt financing, managed borrowing, selling players, the idea that your best young players must be sold to benefit the balance books. All of these are industry-specific niches that need to be understood and controlled from a business position. Another issue is, and we get this a lot with when we work with charities and when we work with government organisations, is Manchester United is an incredibly public organisation. Everybody, there are, I run Underpin Consultants. There are no fanzines, blogs, supporters groups, podcasts, video channels, national television programs, all about every decision I possibly make. And so when you have a thing like that, and sometimes councils have this as well. So, a council is expected to do certain things. They have to be honest and open and transparent. And so when you're doing projects, you need to be updating your stakeholders. And if you don't do that and aren't transparent and aren't telling people why you're doing things and not promoting a positive attitude to the whole change management process, everyone's going to get really upset and really annoyed. Increasing ticket prices, removing ticket classes, wage decisions, getting rid of 200 people, closing the food canteen at Old Trafford and and the training ground. These are all negative perception issues, and they're not being explained well enough, in my opinion, from the leadership as to why we're having to do this. What is the reason for it? Do we have a good reason? If we don't have a good reason, why are we doing it? If we do have a good reason, why aren't we telling people about it? That's a super important part of business, is as a leader, is to communicate why you're doing things. No one expects this to be easy. Why do we get ourselves into this in the first place? Why are we trying to get ourselves out of it? And what will be the positives when we do it? At the moment, they're cutting and they're making people do it, but I've got no idea what their plans are long term. And again, that leads to passionate support can turn into passionate hate. And if you don't have the supporters on your side, as you saw in 2005 when the Glazers took over at Manchester United, and they laid that, there was a large amount of debt put into Manchester United. You had FC United of Manchester created. You still have green and yellow protests at Manchester United, and that's 20 years ago, and that's because it was not properly explained to people, and maybe it wasn't the best opportunity for the stakeholders, but they have such a positive stakeholder group at Manchester United that they need to be brought along. And if you look at other parts of the industry, you look at Italy, for example, with their ultra network and how involved they are, or in Germany with their fan-owned clubs, you can see there are different models of doing this. And I'm not saying we should switch over, but understand that these things are important, because at the moment it feels like it's not important to the leadership because they're not explaining it to people. People feel like they're being taken for a ride. Manchester United is a business community asset, and so that's important of what we need to be able to look at. And then standard business practices doesn't always look good. Sometimes, Jim Ratcliffe has and the team that he has brought in has an incredibly unenviable task of having a company that's losing 300 million a year, having limited ability to do the changes, and pushing for change that is going to look terrible from the outside. And yes, you have to do it. And I'm not saying here that Jim Ratcliffe should be doing nothing or should be pumping loads of money. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, how do we move forward as together without it feeling like the leadership is just doing its own thing without consulting with everybody else? So, just want to spend a couple of minutes on something that has happened over the last couple of months, and highlighting how it is when you have lots of little issues that are happening at a company, that it can create a situation that is absolutely disastrous. And it was nobody's initial intention or positivity, but these kind of small issues can snowball into something which creates a genuine crisis at the club. So after the sacking of Erik ten Hag, who plays in a very particular way, the Ajax model, Manchester United went out and hired Ruben Amorim from Sporting. And he has a very particular way of playing. He plays 3-5-2. And what that means for non-business people, non-marketing people, is he plays in a very specific way and has never played more than one or two matches out of that system. He is what's known as a tactical zealot. So he doesn't change the way he plays to meet the team. He wants to impose the way that he puts his methodology of playing football onto the pitch. There are other managers, Sam Allardyce, Sean Dyche, David Moyes, who are known as pragmatists. So, we try and adapt to them, and this is usually an underdog thing. And Manchester United effectively should be the kind of team that is trying to impose itself upon the game. So, Ruben Amorim comes in. He's seen as one of the best young managers in the world. That's great. You've gone out, you've identified who you want, and you want to get one of the best, and that's great. But he's a tactical zealot. So he's very specific about the way he wants to play, and therefore he needs a lot of things in place to make that work. He was asked by the board to start mid-season, and he didn't want to. So so Manchester United told Ruben Amorim that the job won't be available in the summer, and you either have to take it now and leave your old job, and we will pay £10 million for you to come in, but we want you to start right away. That's a big issue for me, and because you're adding additional pressure, and in my head, what's happened, and you can see it on the pitch, and they've not played well, and they're not doing well in the league, and they are playing this 3-5-2 stubbornly, is the resources available to him within the team do not match what kind of philosophy he's trying to play. And from a management point of view, from a leadership point of view in business, again, as we said a few minutes ago, we want to have a manager or a leader who has the tools he needs to succeed. And the way you do that is by aligning philosophy, values, mission, vision, benefits, all of those kinds of things, so that when the manager or the leader wants to deliver a project, he delivers that project in a way that is best for him, that works best for his skills, and he has a team to able to accomplish that. What's happened at Manchester United is Ruben Amorim has been brought in and wants to play a particular way, wants to run his team a particular way. But there is no one in that team. There are very few people in that team who can actually do what he wants to do. So either you've got two options. You make the leader change the way that they want to play. And that's what happened previously with Eric Ten Hag. You play for a little bit, you change your philosophy, you get smaller and compact, you do all of that. That, for me, sounds like a terrible idea. The other problem, and the other way of solving that problem, is you make team members who do not like and are not able and do not have the skills to do certain things within that team to do things that they don't want to do and aren't good at. And what that does is that creates a situation where people are being set up to fail. And if you think about, I've had this personally in my life where, I'm very strategically minded. Attention to detail is not my strongest point of view. And I've been put in positions where my job requires me to have incredibly strong attention to detail. I'm bad at that job. I'd be much better in a different job, doing a different role. And so that's where United are at the moment. They've got a manager and who's been brought in because they knew who he was and how he wanted to play, and he wants to play that way. But he hasn't been backed up with the available resources to match his philosophy, and so they're failing because there's no coherent strategy. The other issue is his results are demanded instantly, and this is a sector-wide issue. This is a football-wide issue. When he joined the team, he needs to win right now, and they've tried to turn around and say, well, this season is gone. We're not really doing anything. We're not going to win the league. We're not going to get into Europe. Fine. We're going to write this season off, but we're going to start afresh in July. In August, we're going to do that. The issue is that's all well and good to say, but in practice, that's incredibly difficult to endure. To turn around and say, okay, team, for the next 9 months, this is going to be awful. We're going to fail over and over again. We're not going to do the things that we want to do. We're gonna try as hard as we can, but we know that the people here aren't able to run the leaders' plan. And so we're just going to sit here for 9 months and be bad at our jobs. That's really hard internally, but it's even more hard externally. If you look at the kind of people, all the pundits are now turning around and saying it was a bad decision to employ him, to employ Amorim, or, they didn't back him enough in the transfer market. And yeah, of course. But what they've done, for me, the problem is the leadership of Manchester United have set up through a series of marginal losses, of small pieces of information, small decisions being made, have set Ruben Amorim up to fail. They knew who he was, everybody knew the way he played, and to bring him into this situation where he doesn't have the players is unfair on the players and it's unfair on the manager. And when it inevitably goes wrong, the people who suffer are the people who work for the company who are being the revenues aren't up, so we can't afford to keep on, staff, and we're having to make them redundant. But also the players themselves who are being asked to do things that they don't want to do, and they feel despondent, so they play worse, and it's an issue there. And then the manager, who is one of the best young managers in the world and has a very specific philosophy and way he wants to play, he is being put in a situation where he's losing confidence, he's getting frustrated, he's getting angry. And then you're in a kind of death spiral because all of that is true and it's not getting better because the amount of money that's being lost by the business is not allowing you to bring the resources that you need in. I'm sure Manchester United and Ruben Amorim and all the players there would have loved to go out and bring in the players that are needed for him to do his job properly. But they didn't because they're financially constrained by past mistakes. So how do you get out of this? How do you get out of this death spiral? Well, what's interesting is Manchester United kind of did it before. Back in 1992, Manchester United weren't playing particularly well, and so they went into the youth setup and found a bunch of players that are now living legends: Paul Scholes, David Beckham, Gary Neville, Phil Neville, Nicky Butt. The class of '92. That's one way of looking at it, which is train your own. Stop going out and selling them, but selling at people. But that, for me, doesn't work anymore because the way that the whole football system is set up is it's designed to bring players through and then sell them, and then buy new players so that you can balance the book through amortization. So my conclusion is this: Manchester United are paying for their own mistakes. This is no one's problem but Manchester United. It's 20 years of mismanagement. It's not having senior leadership people in place for multiple years, not having a sporting director, firing managers, bringing in managers of different ilk, not providing them with the support and the positivity that they need. They are in an unsustainable position as an industry and a club. So Jim Ratcliffe is doing what's required, limitedly, from a specifically business perspective. But it's not necessarily in the right way publicly, and it's not being communicated both publicly and privately what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be working on this, how we make this a success long term. He does need to balance the books. And so big, horrible decisions need to be made. There needs to be a long-term philosophy that everybody believes in. I think the decisions that they've made over the last 12 months with Dan Ashworth and bringing and sacking Ten Hag and bringing in Ruben Amorim and all of that kind of stuff shows to me that they are trying very hard to bring in a long-term philosophy, but I'm not sure how well they're doing on that at the moment. Maybe that will change over the coming months. However, multiple redundancy rounds, keeping Ten Hag and firing him, bringing in Wilcox, Barada and Ashworth, and then getting rid of Ashworth, and no improvement in performance demonstrates to me that if this is working, if this is how they want to do it, if they are, we want this to happen, this is the things that need to happen, this is part of our plan, we don't know that as stakeholders. And so as stakeholders, as leaders, we need to make sure that when change management is happening, and that's what this is, that there is a proper functional communication strategy that says, this is why we're doing it. We're getting your input. We're getting your support. This is not a tyranny. This is not a one-person show. We want to have your support. We want to have your help. That, for me, is a better way of doing it. Yes, it takes more time. Yes, it's more difficult. But just arbitrarily making decisions about ticket pricing and redundancies and not explaining why you're doing it is, in a community sense, in a stakeholder sense, is really difficult. And so you can see that a very niche, very different, very difficult business situation requires a lot of insight and understanding. And every business is different, and every business has different challenges and pressures and abilities to do what they need to do. And so when you have a business that you're either starting up or you're running, mapping what is the problem, how it's worked, what's it's been like in the past, what levers can we pull, how can we move forward in a sustainable way for our business in our area with our challenges. That's the key to business success. Not just slapping on a business plan that works for another organization in another sector for reasons that you don't quite understand. Bringing people along for the ride is also super important. You need to make sure that everybody who is involved in this understands what's being done, why it's being done, and most importantly, how long it's going to take. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it, and hopefully you've learned a couple of things. And we'll be back soon with another live stream. Have a great week.